Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives. Jim is back from the NRA annual meeting in Indianapolis, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that in our bad martini, unfortunately. But, Jim, let's start with our good martini, and it's not too often that mass shootings are in our good martini. But the shooting at the synagogue in Poway, California, near San Diego on Saturday could have been a whole lot worse. And the fact that it wasn't is because of heroic actions taken by a number of people. One person died. 4 people, I believe, were shot in total. The person who died was a woman named Lori Gilbert Kay, and the reason that she died is because she put herself in between the gunman and the rabbi at this particular synagogue, which is having services on the final day of Passover. Here's the rabbi, Yisrael Goldstein, talking about Lori Gilbert Kay.
In my own interpretation, Lori took the bullet for all of us. She died to protect all of us.
Then the shooter himself was confronted inside the synagogue and then outside the synagogue. The person who confronted him inside the synagogue was a guy named Oscar Stewart. Here's what he had to say about the initial confrontation.
I was in the sanctuary, and I heard gunshots. I saw everybody running, so I ran to the lobby where the guy was with the gun. And I saw him discharge 2 more rounds. As he was discharging the rounds, I ran up to him and I yelled at him, and he dropped his weapon and he ran out, and I chased him out of the sanctuary. I was in the military, and I think that's what I ran to fire, and that's what I did.
And then he followed him outside, and that's where the Border Patrol agent, the off-duty agent that you might have heard of, also came on the scene with the weapon he was carrying.
And I chased him out into the street, into his car. I punched his car. Then he was going to pick up his weapon again. So being in the military, I knew that you have 5 feet. If a weapon is ineffective within 5 feet. So I was trying to get that 5 feet in. I saw him going to pick up the weapon again, so I punched the car. He dropped it and turned the ignition of the car on.
Now, where was the Border Patrol agent?
He was in the congregation. He came out when I was outside. He came out and he yelled, "Clear back! I have a gun." And so I moved back. I'm glad he was trained.
And here's what Oscar Stewart had to say about his own actions.
I didn't plan it. I didn't think about it. It's just what I did. So, they say I'm a hero. I don't think I'm a hero. I just did what I did.
Yeah, you're a hero, whether you want to admit it or not. Amazing actions by Mr. Stewart, by Lori Gilbert Kay, by Jonathan Morales. That's the name of the off-duty Border Patrol agent, and so many others who are courageous there, Jim. So, and obviously we have another deranged person who wanted to target Jewish people. Sadly, one life was lost, but when you look at what happened in Pittsburgh and what this person was clearly trying to accomplish, it was not nearly as bad as it could have been thanks to heroic actions.
Yeah, Greg, when this happens, there's a mass shooting or an attempted mass shooting, it can be frustrating when you hear somebody say, if only there had been somebody there with a gun. There are times it might seem a little, it may be accurate, but it may seem like insufficient sympathy to what happened or wishful thinking. But what happened here demonstrates that actually, having someone armed on the scene complicates the effort of the mass shooter, who generally wants to kill as many people as possible. It is unspeakably tragic that this woman lost her life, and she herself indeed was a hero for attempting to save the life of the rabbi and everyone else being targeted. But the presence of these 2 guys and their ability to confront the gunman prevented many more people from being shot and probably losing their lives. So that's the silver lining in this. Whenever things like this happen, you inevitably hear some people saying, well, it's time for gun control. I have a piece on the editor's desk right now that basically is looking at not just the gun control aspect of this, but this trend of angry young men who sometimes they're radicalized by the internet, sometimes they're just angry at the world, sometimes it's kids in high schools. They reach some sort of state where they believe the only way to deal with their problems is to pick up a gun and start shooting people. Now, we're going to obviously have a full investigation into this. We're going to see, was this someone who was legally able to purchase a gun? Did this person steal the gun? How did the person get the firearms? Were there warning signs missed? Kind of surprising about this case. This was this young man came from a family that was intact, and people who knew them family said that they were considered a loving family. The kid had achieved very well in school, was taking AP classes, accomplished pianist, and apparently had Jewish friends when he was younger. So this is not someone you necessarily would have expected to get radicalized and turn into some anti-Semitic maniac. So it's gonna be interesting to dig into this. But I think the heart of this is a real concern about what's kind of feeding into someone's mind and giving them this mentality that this is what they're supposed to do, that this is what's going to solve the problems in their life. But anyway, a really sad and awful story in California would have and could have been so much worse if these two men weren't there. So bravo to them, and thank God they were there, Greg.
Absolutely right. All right, let's move on to our bad martini now, Jim. And usually we're not talking about what a terrible annual meeting the National Rifle Association just had. It was pretty jubilant the first couple of days. The president spoke there on Friday. He announced he was removing the United States as a signatory to the UN arms treaty, small arms treaty that's supposedly designed to end the proliferation of weapons to bad actors around the world, but could potentially infringe on the Second Amendment in more ways than one. But then the bad news started to happen at the NRA convention, and what didn't appear to be happening at the start of the week was happening by the end of the week. NRA President Oliver North announcing, I don't think voluntarily, that he would not be seeking a second term as president. And then, as you write in the Morning Jolt today, Jim, there's financial issues on a number of fronts. First of all, I'm quoting now, the organization faces an intense investigation by New York State Attorney General Letitia James, who has already called the organization a terrorist group. Ordinarily, the NRA's best defense would be to point to James' incendiary denunciations and call the investigation a politically motivated witch hunt. And NRA Executive Director Wayne LaPierre said as much at the convention Saturday morning. But both LaPierre and Ollie North have traded letters accusing the other of impropriety and financial mismanagement, and recent investigations by The New Yorker quoted former employees of the NRA and its primary public relations firm, Ackerman McQueen, painting an ugly portrait of self-dealing and runaway spending. James might be pursuing a political vendetta, but that doesn't mean there's nothing substantive to investigate. So, Jim, this turned into an ugly match between LaPierre and North. North is out. LaPierre might be, but it's going to take a while, according to your explanation today. So, heading into a presidential election year, it's not where you want the NRA to be.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I think a lot of people would like to turn this into just a Wayne LaPierre versus Ollie North fight, or, oh, here comes the liberal media trying to paint the NRA as looking bad. It's neither explanation, which I've seen floating around on social media, really accurately summarizes what's going on. And if people can spare a little bit of a deep background on this. Ackerman McQueen has been the NRA's primary public relations firm for decades, and it's generally been a productive and happy relationship between the two. It's very lucrative for Ackerman McQueen. I believe financial documents that were in the New Yorker said there was a neighborhood of close to $40 million a year. Now, Ackerman McQueen does a lot of stuff. It does the print advertising. It prints several magazines. If you've seen NRA TV and my numerous appearances with my friend Cam Edwards, they produce all that stuff. Dana Lash's program, all of this stuff is done under Ackerman McQueen with this very big contract. Now, this has not happened, something that happened overnight, but bit by bit, year by year, there have been some folks at the NRA who have been asking, hey, are we getting our money's worth out of this? This is a lot of money to give to a PR firm. How is our money being spent? And according to Oliver North's account, in September 2018, several NRA board members came to him and said, we're trying to get answers from Ackerman McQueen about how they're spending our money, and they're not being responsive. About a month ago, the NRA sued Ackerman McQueen to get access to financial documents. I don't know. And look, obviously this is, I have friends in both organizations. I think highly of both people in both organizations, but it's a very awkward and unusual spot when a organization sues their PR firm. And when they say, how are you spending our money? And the PR firm effectively says, we're not going to tell you. That usually is a very ominous sign. The New Yorker article detailed a whole bunch of ways in which there was a lot of money being spent by Ackerman McQueen in ways that folks might question. One allegation is the claim that there's been about $200,000 spent on Wayne LaPierre's wardrobe. LaPierre says, look, that's over a 15-year period. I can do math. That comes out to more than $13,000 a year, which seems like a lot. Oliver North was getting paid about $1 million at least to do a television show. Folks may remember he had a weekend show on Fox News Channel, War Stories. The idea was he was going to be doing a very similar type programming for NRA TV, and it would be like American, I think it was, Oliver North's American Heroes or something like that. Well, as of this conversation, or at least the last report I had seen, Oliver North had only done 3 of those episodes, had been completed. And again, he was getting paid $1 million a year. Now, of course, you think about who in the top of the NRA would be in charge of watching over Ackerman McQueen and make sure that they're spending their money accurately. Well, it probably would be folks like Oliver North, the president, and Wayne LaPierre, the executive vice president. So the argument is that Ackerman McQueen is the fox is guarding the hen house, so to speak. In other words, the people who'd be in charge of making sure that Ackerman McQueen is giving them their money's worth are among the people getting paid lots amount of money or having their clothing budget taken care of by Ackerman McQueen. The lawsuit, so this internal split is bad, and a lot of people wonder if this is, a salvageable relationship. Then, as you alluded to, the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, who has openly stated she hates the NRA. There's really no two ways about it. She's called it a terrorist organization. She has an absolute desire to see that organization shut down. Well, the National Rifle Association, its charter is in New York State. So for the New York Attorney General has very wide range of latitude about being able to audit them and to look at the books and make sure that they're doing everything that complies with New York State laws for a nonprofit organization, which, by the way, the NRA is. It's conceivable that when all is said and done from all this, the NRA loses its status as a nonprofit organization, which would be very bad for them. Of course, there's probably a long way before that. I don't know exactly how this is going to shake out. As of we are having this conversation, but I'm no longer down in Indy. The board meeting was held on Monday. I came back last night. According to folks who are on the ground, they're now in closed session. It would not surprise me if there are some frank and heated exchanges going on behind those closed doors. There are some NRA board members who are really upset about all this. And look, obviously with the New York State Attorney General, getting ready to kick down the door, she's already sent out subpoenas. She's already ordered to preserve all financial documents. They could be in for a long and ugly and very embarrassing investigation. So still kind of up in the air as to how this all shakes out. But I think it's, obviously this organization is likely to have at least a year's worth of turmoil. And, oh, by the way, 2020 presidential election is approaching. And if I'm President Trump, I don't want the NRA having to deal with all of this instead of focusing on preparing to get out the vote in November 2020.
Well, that's exactly right. And if you're spending a ton of money on lawyers, that's money you can't spend elsewhere. So,
yep.
Not good. Not good. Let's move on to our crazy martini now, Jim, and back to anti-Semitism, unfortunately. Let's move on to the New York Times, which took a lot of heat in the last couple days, and deservedly so, for a political cartoon that ran, which depicted Benjamin Netanyahu as a dog leading a blind President Trump. So basically, Trump's doing wherever Netanyahu leads him. And then this obviously got a huge backlash as being anti-Semitic, portraying the leader of Israel as a dog. And the New York Times bravely blamed it on a mid-level editor who had no supervision. We'll see what happens with that. But while they're still dealing with the fallout from that, there was another editorial cartoon over the past couple of days. And this one's a little bit harder to interpret, but it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu dressed kind of in monk's robes, but from a Jewish perspective, maybe that's a different term there, and taking a selfie while holding up what looks like one of the tablets from the Ten Commandments with the Star of David on it. So, Jim, what is up with the New York Times?
It's not quite the explanation we heard from the IRS of rogue, low-level employees in Cincinnati. But now we're being told, first of all, this is the international edition. It's not the domestic edition. One employee who wasn't being properly supervised made the decision, and that first of all, it's a little unnerving. Like, folks, I know there are days it's hard to tell, but everybody edits what I do at National Review, which, by the way, means I have somebody to blame when all the typos get through. But all this recognition that, first of all, the whole idea of, I guess that the cartoonist wanted to say Trump does whatever Bibi Netanyahu wants him to do. Or Bibi Netanyahu is leading Trump or something. And there are different ways you could have, we can argue about whether that's an accurate assessment of things, but fine. You want to make that argument, you can. I think once you depict someone as a dog, and oh, by the way, you put that big Jewish star on the collar to demonstrate that, and the portrayal of Trump, the whole thing just kind of drips with contempt. And even that's there, but now you start getting into this, the Jews are controlling things. The Jews are conspiracy, the kind of conspiratorial things that you see in the uglier corners of the internet, and that has this long and ugly history of leading to violence. I think Bret Stephens had a terrific column on this where he points out it's not just this was a bad cartoon and they shouldn't have published it. It's also that, by the way, I'm very interested in how much anger is coming towards the New York Times. And I in all the coverage, Greg, I haven't seen who the name of the cartoonist is.
Right.
Because I say this as a person who spent a lot of years aspiring to be a political cartoonist, and for everyone who was following Ned the Alien back in the year 2000. Thank you for all those fans out there. There's a lot of really bad cartoons out there. Once where, the old Herb Block giant labeling who your person is and basically making the point of, this person, they stink. It's just kind of this facile, almost childish, snide. There's no wit. There's no surprise. Basically, hi, I'm a cartoonist and I hate this person is basically the subtext of the cartoon. And I don't think it really, to me, it's a waste of newsprint space. It's a waste of, you're not really adding something or bringing anything that's all that surprising or thought-provoking to the readers of the newspaper. But Bret Stephens' point is look, this is the New York Times, which would bend over backwards to avoid ever printing anything that would be construed as racist, as xenophobic, as sexist. Their goal is to never offend any particular ethnic group or religious group, except this one. Apparently this one, all of their, and no doubt the editors who signed off on this and the one person who selected this all think of themselves as being good people who are not full of hate and who would never traffic in hatred towards a particular group. But for some reason, this image did not raise any red flags in their mind. And I think Bret Stephens is right that this is a very revealing moment that, out of all the – I also just how bad were all the cartoons that didn't get picked on that day, Greg?
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is the same New York Times that refused to print the Muhammad cartoon from Charlie Hebdo even after that was the premise for the terrorist attack supposedly against Charlie Hebdo in Paris. You go back – when I was – working with the Hillsdale student newspaper called The Collegian many, many moons ago. It's now one of the top papers in the country. I assure you it wasn't then. We had the writers go over it. We had the section editors go over it. We had the copy editor go over it. And so we had all these different layers of making sure things were done right. So the idea that the New York Times, even if it is the international edition, didn't have this sort of plan in place is absolutely absurd. But Hillsdale's got a lot of excitement this weekend because they've got a new chairman of the board of trustees, and he's famous, so you might have to buy a vowel to find out who he is.
Vanna?
No, but hopefully she'll be on campus once in a while. That'd be fun. No, Pat Sajak. Pretty exciting. Anyway, as we depart here on Monday, we do end on a sad note because longtime Indiana Senator Richard Lugar passed away at the age of 87 over the weekend. He was first elected in 1976. He was elected 6 times. He was actually defeated in a primary and in a race for his 7th term against Richard Murdoch in 2012. Murdoch went on to lose that race. That's how we got Joe Donnelly, who then lost 6 years later. Dick Lugar, for the most part, a pretty quiet guy, pretty strong rating on conservative issues on most issues across the board. We weren't thrilled with him when he was such a strong advocate, I believe, of the START II treaty in the early days of the Obama administration. Got tagged a little bit as a guy who basically moved to Washington towards the end, but universally praised as a guy who was very kind and decent, and a lot of the Democrats talking about how he worked across the aisle on nuclear proliferation and so forth. Jim, what are your thoughts as you learned of the passing of Dick Lugar?
Well, yeah, just an observation, because there was by the time it came down to the primary of him versus Richard Murdoch, a lot of folks on the right, this is kind of in the height of the Tea Party era, had found Lugar to be kind of become a squish, become a moderate. And they nominated Murdoch, and we see how well that turned out for us. So maybe that wasn't the right call back then. But I think about even earlier, I want to say there was Michael Crowley, the New Republic, and if not, there was some writer at the New Republic who went back. It was after sometime after 9/11, and people may forget, Dick Lugar ran for president in 1996.
Yes.
This was a fairly, big Republican field. Arlen Specter ran that. If you were an old senator, you were basically running in 1996.
Yep, Phil Graham.
Besides Dole, you had Phil Graham, who we all loved, so Lugar got almost no attention for his bid. It was one of those where he was in very quickly and he was out very quickly. But the theme of his campaign was he was concerned. Obviously, he was always involved in nuclear arms control and efforts to lock down, the nuclear arsenal in Russia after the end of the Cold War. He believed this was an ignored issue that was not getting nearly enough attention, and that the single biggest threat facing America, this is 1996, we're starting to enter the dot-com boom, things are looking pretty good. He says, look, this seems pretty good, but we are facing major dangers in the years to come. We need to focus on these arsenals and locking them down, and the general overall threat of terrorism. And among them, I believe it was Michael Crowley, at the time he said, look at Dick Lugar's panicking, freak out, nervous Nelly, Chicken Little, the sky is falling, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, this was a few years before the 9/11 attack. So Michael Crowley wrote gosh darn it, Dick Lugar was right and I was wrong column. So I loved the Crowley willingness to go back to, and say, oh, you know what? Wow, I was totally wrong on this. Lugar knew what he was talking about. We've now been through this terrible terrorist attack. We're now very concerned about terrorists getting their hands on weapons of mass destruction. Sorry about that. I should not have downplayed you. I should not have poo-pooed, these concerns Lugar was doing. And, I don't think Lugar had ever, taken a nasty victory lap or anything like that or called anything about it. He was far too much of a gentleman. But he was a guy who was not chasing the headline of the day or whatever was the hot topic du jour. He looked at these big international issues, and he was looking at threats that were gathering when nobody else was. So we'll raise a glass to Dick Lugar. We'll miss him. Even when we disagree with him, he was a true statesman, and the world could use more men like him.
Yeah, very well said, Jim. And you see the glowing statements on both sides of the aisle, and certainly from strong conservatives, everyone from Vice President Pence to former Senator Dan Coates to Mitch Daniels, a lot of folks, a lot of respect for Dick Lugar. So condolences to his family. Jim, we're actually together not only for one day this week, but hopefully for the entire week. Talk to you tomorrow.
I'm home again, Greg. See you tomorrow.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.